Mkaya, we welcome now the MEC for Finance in Gauteng, Barbara Creecy, who delivered the budget today. MEC, welcome. Thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Before we get into the issues, let me just remind you of the number to call. Questions, suggestions, concerns. We'd love to hear from you. 086 0000 959 36959 for text messages. Follow me on Twitter at John Perlman. Go to the Today with John Perlman Facebook page. MEC, I suppose the first question to you is the first one I asked Kanti Pai, and I'd like your view. It would seem to me that the better you do, you and your colleagues, and I guess everyone else backing you, the better you do at making Gauteng a place that provides good services and economic opportunity, the more difficult it's going to be to keep Gauteng a place that provides good services and delivers economic opportunity, because the rest of South Africa is going to stream here, particularly with the growth rates that we have at the moment. It must be paradoxical and must be worrying.
Well, I think that we do know that 1.8 million people have migrated into this province over the last 5 years. And clearly that does put incredible strain on our health and education services, and it does mean that my colleagues responsible for these departments are always chasing moving targets. I think we also need to look at the upside of urbanization. We know that across the globe, urban conglomerates are the places where economies grow. They are the places that attract skilled workforces. They are the places that have markets for goods and services. So I think that there are two sides to the in-migration coin. We obviously benefit from all the skilled people. 60% of Gauteng's workforce has post-school qualifications. We have 3 mega cities who are responsible for 80% of the GDP. So clearly there are also benefits to urban conglomeration.
086 0000 959 36959 if you'd like to send us a text. I wonder if we could start almost at the beginning with where Gauteng gets its money and why we're going to be getting less from central government this year. My understanding is 95% of the money that you have explained how you're going to allocate is in fact money that we get from the centre, which presumably got to the centre from Gauteng in the first place.
Well, yes, I think that 95% of our revenue does come from the national fiscus. It comes in the form of the conditional grant, which is a proportion that each province gets. We get 19% of the equitable share, and then there are conditional grants that fund specific things, housing. All kinds of services, earmarked grants for those services. We generate 5% of our own revenue. And this is something that we have been growing over the last couple of years. And obviously in tough financial times, our ability to grow our own revenue is going to be something that will determine our ability to maintain service level provision.
One of the things you're going to have to do, and you made this clear in your budget speech, is the fact that Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan made very clear that there's less money to work with. You made it clear that you're cutting fat, but how do you know when you're cutting fat, and how do you make sure that you're not cutting muscle?
Well, that's an important issue, and I think that it really goes to the point that one size doesn't fit all. We want to cut travel. But if you are reliant on agricultural extension officers and you say that nobody can travel more than 200 kilometers a month, you're soon going to find that all your agricultural officers do is sit in their offices, and that's not a good use of the money you spend on their salaries. So I think one size fits all doesn't work in that situation. We do work closely with departments to ask their views about what they think they can cut costs on. But I think that there are some transversal things we want to look at. We've been building a broadband network that obviously allows us to start looking at things like the migration from voice to data.
Yes.
It means we should be able to cut back on telecommunications budgets, for example. So it's ongoing work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. I think something that we feel positive about, even in these difficult times, is that Gauteng has had scarce resources comparative to the population it serves for a long time. We've had to maintain our wage bill below 60%. We have had to cut back on costs. We've had to reprioritize. We've already worked on consolidating our government entities and reducing duplication. And all of that, I think, has put us in a relatively better position now that we are facing this 2.9 billion cut over the medium term.
086 00 959. Ivan is calling from Mogale City. Good evening.
Hello, John. Hello to your guest. John, I would just like to compare the Western Cape to Gauteng and ask Barbara, look, they're exposed to pretty much the same thing. The Western Cape, I think, has much more difficulty with immigration because it's mainly from the Eastern Cape, so it's not such skilled people. But it's a mixed blessing because immigrants do contribute to some extent. Look at the Germans welcoming these immigrants because they are going to contribute to the economy. But Gauteng is only growing at 1.5%, which is almost the same as the rest of South Africa. And Gauteng, for instance, failed to spend 1.5 billion of its housing budget. So, and you know, the Western Cape, I think, is labouring under the position that the government doesn't really support it. The government has blocked some of Western Cape housing projects, and yet the Western Cape is doing better than Gauteng. For instance,
against what measure,
like
Ivan?
10 of the best 20 cities in South Africa are Western Cape cities.
So what's your question?
I'm just.
Oh, you're just raising a point. Okay. MEC, a response. Thanks, Ivan.
I think that the Gauteng provincial government is not happy about the fact that the Central Treasury has reallocated 900 million of our housing budget. I think the Premier has already intervened in that situation. There is a new MEC, there is a new acting head of that department, and we are all looking forward to MEC Mashatile's budget speech. I'm sure he's going to tell us how he is going to turn that situation around and how he is going to provide the houses that we need so badly in this province.
086 00 959. Happy's on the line from Thunderbale Park. We'll take that call in a moment. You too can call in. We have Finance MEC Barbara Creecy. She today delivered a budget of 103.4 billion rand. There's a lot of noughts on that, Mkai. We need to talk about how it's going to get spent. Give us your calls, Mkai, on 086 00 959 36959 for text messages. We're talking about the budget delivered today in Gauteng by Finance MEC Barbara Creecy. There's going to be huge investment in all sorts of things. For example, 1.9 billion rand for the upgrading of some hospitals and the construction of others. 3 billion for the completion of 12 new schools, the upgrading of 26 existing schools to particularly get them online with the opportunities provided by new technology, the internet and so on. And 123 other schools are going to get fixed up. A lot of money on the table. So let's get your views on how you think it might be spent better. Happy's in Thunderbale Park. Hi.
Hi, John. How are you?
Fine, and you?
Great. And good evening to the MEC as well. John, I've got just two questions. From a Gauteng budget point of view, how's the allocation, or what's the percentage allocation for North Gauteng, which would be a Pretoria region, Central, which is Johannesburg, and the South, which is Vereeniging or the Vaal area, right?
And what about Eastern? What about East and West?
Look, I'd sum up East and West within Central, because Ekurhuleni, it's more towards Joburg and whatnot. But maybe, seeing that you just mentioned that, maybe we can make that as well. Okay. So North, Central, East, West, and South.
Okay.
That's just the one question. And then the second question is, in terms of infrastructure spend, how is it decided that which townships gets tarred and which ones don't get tarred? For example, Sharpeville is a very small township, but almost 90% of the roads here are not tarred. It's still gravel, as compared to Ekurhuleni. Dawn of Democracy, Ekurhuleni, the entire township was tarred. Before then, it was gravel roads as well. How was that decision made?
Okay, thanks. In terms of the I guess the different economic hubs, the different regional configurations in Gauteng, how do you allocate and how do you balance what, for example, the Ekurhuleni Metro is going to spend with what you're going to do?
Well, I think that last year in his State of the Province address, Premier Makura identified the 5 development regions. He also identified particular economic sectors that he felt would be best promoted in the different regions. Clearly that relates both to the strategic advantage of those existing regions, but also it would relate to opportunities that exist. Now, clearly there is a difference between your metros and your district municipalities, West Rand and Sedibeng. I think Happy raises the issue, and good evening to him, by the way. Happy raises the issue of why are roads tarred in Ekurhuleni, and I think in most parts of Johannesburg, but in Sedibeng you might not find that to be the case. I think that the internal tarring of roads is a municipal responsibility. It obviously relates to the tax base of those municipalities, and your metros would have a much bigger tax base than Mfuleni would have, for example. I think that from the side of provincial government, we would be making decisions on the basis of population development. We would be making decisions on the basis of local need. Obviously, if you have to look at the metropolitan areas, they would get the lion's share of the infrastructure budgets. But I think that we also try to compensate for the fact that the West Rand and Sedibeng have a smaller tax base. So we try to compensate and make sure that we're providing schools, hospitals, other social infrastructure. We've just finished a massive road development. You would know that there's been a major upgrade of the N12.
Yes.
For the West Rand, not told, by the way. So I think that those are the kinds of considerations that would go into making those decisions on where to spend.
So just on roads, Mkai, if you want to know what roads are due for major upgrades, I mean, the good news is you'll get a good road. The bad news, I guess, is that you're going to have to drive a little bit more slowly through the roadworks, but I think we all know what we'd prefer. William Nicol from PWV5 to Deep Sloot, that's going to be upgraded from single to double. There's going to be fixing of one of the major link roads between Joburg and Lenasia. That's the R554. The N14 from Brakfontein to Hendrik Potgieter is going to get some work. The road between Vereniging and Alberton is going to get some fixing up. And the road Solomon Mahlangu from the N4 to Mamelodi is going to get some fixing. And I think that's a road that has certainly frustrated people in the past. I want to turn to something different, MEC, and ask you this. I mean, one of the areas where you're saying that Gauteng could be run as a much tighter ship is around what kind of people we hire to do what. And I'm looking at your the principles you talked about, the medium-term expenditure framework being anchored around, and I'll read your words: prioritizing filling posts for teachers, doctors, nurses, and social workers, and abolishing administrative posts we no longer need. First of all, how do you establish that those posts are no longer needed? And secondly, would that be moving people out of their jobs, in other words, offering them packages, or waiting for people to leave and not filling them again? What's driving that particular process, and how quickly can you do it?
I think that would be a situation where posts have been vacant for a considerable period of time. They haven't been filled. I think that we have to make sure, even in tough times, that these frontline personnel are there. We have to make sure that as the population pressures increase, that education and health can recruit these personnel. And that means that we need to look elsewhere in government where there are many posts that have been vacant for a long period of time. We have set up a committee. We're working directly with the Office of the Premier and also with departments, and we're saying for starters, let's look at posts that have been vacant for more than 6 months, more than a year, more than 18 months, and let's look at whether you are meeting your targets. Why can't we abolish these particular posts so that going forward we can allocate money for where it's needed most?
086 00 959 36959 for text messages. Twitter at John Perlman is where you can follow me. Lots of people retweeting, but not many people tweeting. I suppose the retweets are good too. Let's turn to some of the other issues that you've raised, MEC, in the budget speech. I mean, the one is that you're looking, and it would seem succeeding in getting private sector partners to get more involved in the funding of infrastructure. And this is described as off-budget financing in your speech, which suggests that the public doesn't pay for it. And I'm wondering if that's entirely true, given that there's always an interest repayment if any of these things are loans, if there are financing agreements. Is it really accurate to call this off-budget?
Well, I think...
It may be a technical term, by the way, but it might be misleading.
I think that what we're talking about here, first of all, we're not talking about loans, because provincial governments obviously have constraints around borrowing.
Right.
We are talking about private-public partnerships, and these are projects that would be in the economic space, so they would have a revenue stream. An example being the Kopanong precinct, which is the government precinct. Obviously, we would be paying rent on our existing buildings. So whatever investment was made to upgrade the buildings, we would obviously be indirectly paying for that through rental. There's the issue of retrofitting government buildings with solar panels. We pay for electricity, whether that electricity comes from the council, off the grid, or whether it's going to come from a supplier who's going to be providing it through solar panels. So I think you are correct when you say that ultimately there would be a contribution, but I think what we're trying to show here is we're not talking about a situation where province would be advancing some money up front and then the private sector would be advancing a portion.
So all of these projects, and I'm just looking at the list, and I hope I'm on the right list, the Tswana Innovation Hub, you mentioned Kopanong, the rooftop solar panel project, the rooftop solar panel manufacturing opportunity, and so on. These are all opportunities for people to come in because they see a business advantage and not because they're giving government a loan.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So Emmanuel is calling from Don Park on 086 00 959. It's your money, Mkaya. Speak up. Emmanuel, good evening.
How's it, John?
Fine, and you?
I'm okay, man. My concern to the minister is just the issue of housing.
Yes.
You know, if you look around the issue of housing and the issue of squatter camps around Joburg, it's actually, especially if you look at the issue of Jamestown, you find people are living in the state of, I don't know, what is the plan actually regarding maybe demolishing or moving or making sure that Joburg is a safer place. Because even if you drive to Soweto or you drive to anywhere you go, there's just squatter camp everywhere. So what I'm asking is there a plan or budget allocated to move those people and then make sure that they live in better areas?
Okay, thanks. I mean, budget for human settlement, I've got a number 5.2 billion rand here. What's it going to be spent on, MEC, and to what extent does it address Emmanuel's concerns?
I think that Premier Makura has given us the vision that instead of building these small RDP developments, we need to conceptualize new cities, what he calls mega human settlement developments, developments that would include both residential and economic facilities. I think that this concept really relates to the fact of the high in-migration into the province and the fact that it's not helpful to build 100, 200 RDP houses. We really need to be talking about tens of thousands of units. So I think that in this particular budget, the mega projects would include Savannah City, Malibongwe Ridge, Fleurhof, Syferfontein, Boyquet-Long, Nalmapius and Chief Mogali, and all of these are envisaged to be very large settlements, mixed housing offerings, including the possibility of site and service where people could build for themselves, some rental development, as well as your traditional RDP type development. So clearly there is a huge backlog of houses, over 600,000 units in this province. It's not something we're going to do overnight. But I think that it is saying that the concerns that Emmanuel is raising, we would share those particular concerns.
The one thing that troubles me, though, MEC, and I want to engage with you a little bit on this, because it seems to me in South Africa, whenever we get particularly worried, we start using the word mega. And it somehow says, well, if we say we're going to build thousands of houses, those thousands will be built because we've been aiming too low. But how good are we as a province, firstly, but secondly as a country, at doing these huge mega projects? I mean, Kusile and Madupe would suggest we're not very good at it at all, and that there's a cost when things get bigger. The cost of overrun multiplies probably exponentially.
Look, I think I've already acknowledged that we're not happy with the current delivery on the housing program. But I think if we look at some of the history of this province, there was Cosmos City. I think that's a very big development. It's a mixed housing development. It's really that kind of concept that we want to work towards. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've been doing a lot of infill of RDP settlements. It's really not meeting the need, and it often causes conflict in communities, because if there's 500 people who need housing and 100 houses, who's going to get the 100 houses? So it's about saying that we do need to be looking at bigger developments, mixed developments. We need to be leveraging on the private sector, but we also need to accept that one size fits all is not necessarily the best way of approaching the housing need.
What stops us building good, decent houses more quickly? Is it money? Is it technology? Or is it the relationships that have been created in the construction industry? And the one that's always struck me as important is that we seem to have created a situation where people can become brokers of housing contracts rather than builders of houses, that there's a whole lot of a whole cost layer that's been added in the drive towards bringing new players into the housing sector, but without necessarily creating a much stronger, larger and more diversified construction industry.
John, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on the construction industry. And I definitely
wouldn't either.
But I do think that if you take advantage of economies of scale.
Yes.
When you have these very small developments, you've got, for every one of those developments, you've got a site establishment cost. You've got professional fees. Now, if instead of doing that for 50 houses, you're doing it for 5,000 houses, clearly you will have benefit of economies of scale. But as I was saying earlier, I think it's also important to go for the kind of concept that we had in a place like Cosmos City, where you've got mixed development. I think the city of Johannesburg has done some very interesting developments in the southwest of Johannesburg, where they've been building large quantities of flats, infill developments. So I think that these are all new things that we can learn from.
36959 for text messages. This one, no name put to it. How much of last year's targets were not met, and what is the MEC doing with those not meeting targets? And a good broad question coming from that listener, MEC. What went well in last year's budget? What didn't go well, and what did you learn, particularly where targets weren't met?
Well, I think the key area where targets were not met, we've already discussed, which is in relation to housing. Of course, we're not yet at the end of the financial year, but from where I sit, I think that we've done fairly well in health, education, on the infrastructure spend. In fact, we've had to augment those infrastructure budgets this year. That traditionally was an area of underspending, but last year we got to the 98% mark, and I'm hoping we'll get to a similar point in the coming year. I think also on the broadband network, they've managed to meet their targets there. Few of the conditional grants, I think that those have not been performing that well, but these would be some of the smaller grants. I think the big ones, school nutrition, the various health grants, I think all of those, the spending there is pretty good. So overall, I think we are satisfied with the spending levels of departments.
Let's hear from Tabiso, calling from Western area. Hi, Tabiso.
Definitely, John, just there.
Good evening.
Good evening.
John, I actually have a concern in the Department of Health.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we appreciate the drive to recruit more doctors, nurses, and social workers, but there's an exodus of advanced life paramedics from the department. And then the sad part is that outsourcing of the services from private service provider cost the department at least 1.5 million a year. So can the department at least recruit more advanced life paramedics?
Advanced life paramedics, eh?
Yes, advanced life support paramedics with a market-related salary, because there's a real exodus of advanced life paramedics in the Department of Health here.
Tabiso, thanks. We'll get a response to that, and I suppose good news for you. I'm just reading from the budget speech. We will also be revamping our mining towns, which includes Merafong City, Western Area, Randfontein, and Mogale City. More details coming up in the budget from the MEC for Human Settlements. One more call before we get the MEC's response. Osborne, Crystal Park, hi.
Good evening, John. Good evening to the MEC. Just quickly, I just want to say that in as far as government expenditure is concerned, particularly looking at the provisions of the PFMA, I just want to find out how much role would the Gauteng government play in ensuring that since the PFMA is a little bit vague, it speaks of a low possible price. How much role would the Gauteng government play in ensuring that it pays the correct price and not enriching a few individuals so that much more money is involved for basic services? I'll leave it at that.
So you're talking about the tendering process for goods and services, Osborne?
Yes, because sometimes you find that the lowest possible price may not be necessarily below. The government is still paying an arm and a leg for something that could cost far less.
Okay, so government perhaps paying too much for services. Osborne, thanks. Let's start with Tabiso. I mean, the specifics of the advanced life paramedics, but also I would imagine government does get into that cycle of having people who leave and then you have to buy in services anyway, perhaps, whereas a better retention strategy might be more cost effective, but also help build departments. But over to you on what Tabiso was raising.
Yes, thanks very much, Tabiso. I would imagine that paramedics would fall under the category of key personnel, medical personnel, that we would want to continue recruiting. From the side of provincial government, obviously we are policy takers when it comes to salaries. Those salaries are laid down at a national level as a result of national bargaining. So it's not something that we can deal with. But yes, I think that obviously I don't know the details of what's insourced and outsourced in that department in that regard. But I would agree with his general point that it's important that we increase the number of professionals in that particular area.
Osborne, tenders, value for money?
Yes. Look, I think the important initiative that we have in the province is the open tender process. This is a process whereby we are opening the adjudication of public tenders to public scrutiny. What it means is that you can't participate in the meeting, but it's held in public and you can watch it. We've already concluded 3 of those. We've got another 4 that are being adjudicated this month. We've got 7 more in the pipeline. And in the new financial year, the idea is to move towards a situation where 60% of provincial procurement is done through the open tender process.
And in a few sentences, for people who don't know how that process works, just a summary?
Well, obviously, first of all, it's important that all information about who's tendered, the price at which they've tendered and so on would be made available online. Secondly, once the evaluation has taken place, there is this, what they call the bid adjudication meeting,
right,
where the evaluation committee has to come and explain who they've scored on what basis and who is their recommended service provider for the particular service. There is an independent probity audit that we do of the evaluation process to make sure that the way in which the evaluation has been done is according to the bid specifications in the original tender. And I think what has been really important around that whole process is we've had to do a lot of support work with supply chain officials as Treasury. We've come to understand what the weaknesses are. A lot of officials not understanding 100% the regulatory environment. But we've also found that there's lots of weaknesses in the way in which departments draw up their initial tender specifications. And that sometimes leads to amendments along the way that would not necessarily be in line with the Public Finance Management Act. Premier Makhura is very passionate about this particular innovation because he believes that it's absolutely essential that we are able to convince people like Osborne that we are getting the best services for their hard-earned taxes. And we think that the best way to do that is to open up these processes to public scrutiny.
Kiribone on Facebook says, employ more teachers so that the teacher ratio is reduced to 1 to 35. That is, if we really need quality teaching and learning. All schools in Gauteng must have proper sanitation and be adequately resourced. Zola's calling from Meadowlands. Hi, Zola.
Hi, John, and hi, greetings to the MEC as well.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions, but before my question, let me just mention that my mom applied for a house back in 1996, all right? Mm-hmm. And the questions are around the fact that, well, obviously she never got the house. And when I obviously, asked around, I obviously didn't have the facts, but I got the fact that there was a bit of fraud that kind of happened where people within the housing department actually sold houses. But so the question is it really true that there was actually fraudulent activities that actually happened that resulted in people not getting the houses? That is the question number 1. And question number 2 would be, are there any measures or are there any measures to actually combat that going forward? And if there are, is there anything that is actually being done to actually help those that never got housing back in 1996 when they had obviously been, promised, and considering the fact that others actually got the housing, got houses back in that.
Zola, thanks. I think we've got a clear picture of what you want covered. We'll give the MEC a chance in a moment. Boitomelo calling from Umandi. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, and you?
I'm good, thank you. I just have a quick one. Mine is also concerning housing. I think it's clear that, it's something that we see annually that Gauteng, even the whole country, is having a problem in terms of the housing backlog. My question is, I believe that through entrepreneurship, it would be able to get reduced. So what is it that they are doing to support entrepreneurs who are interested in this social housing? So what support is there for them?
Okay, Boitomelo, thanks. On that, I know that the specifics of how the housing system works is not exactly your department, MEC, but some of you did talk in your speech about the promotion of entrepreneurs. We had MEC Maile in with us last week. Is there a strong focus on the housing and infrastructure sector in that drive that you guys are doing?
Yes, I think that you would know that we've had a whole process of registering particularly township entrepreneurs onto the government service provider database. We've moved from a situation where we had about 1,000 in April last year to a situation where we've got over 5,000 on the database this year. Clearly, construction and maintenance is a major area where there is a possibility to employ small entrepreneurs, because it provides an opportunity to deal with a fairly small and compact project. We've earmarked all spending on services under 500,000 for what we're calling the township economy. So that would be emergent entrepreneurs. You would see in the budget speech I've spoken about various programs that we're utilizing to develop those entrepreneurs. And I think one of our focuses is to develop those who are on our supplier database. So if people are interested in registering to do business with the Gauteng government, they can visit our website. They can also go to 75 Fox Street, or when Ntirisano comes to their area, we also offer the opportunity for registration.
Someone on Twitter who calls him or herself Soweto Wireless is kindly advised on the budget allocated for broadband in Soweto and Gauteng. The amount for Gauteng is 325 million rand. The aim is to connect 300 sites over the next financial year and maintain the existing network. One more call, Musa Dobsonville. Hi.
Good evening, John. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm good. First time caller.
Yes, welcome.
Good.
Okay.
I have one question.
Yes, just we don't have a lot of time, so jump in, Musa.
Oh, all right. My question is opposed on the MEC. Remember in Gauteng, how is the Gauteng government this year going to improve the standard of the youth that is unemployed? Remember, we don't want any public attacks or shop looting. So how exactly does the Gauteng government going to handle the issue of the high unemployment rate on the youth?
Thanks, Musa. I'm going to jump right in there with MEC Creecy, because it's the last question. You certainly highlight Gauteng's growing youth population and Musa's concern. What can you say is in your budget that might address that?
Well, I think that we are investing 1.7 billion rand in this financial year on various programs to close the gap between the world of school and the world of work. That would include a substantial bursary, learnership and internship program. We have partnerships worth about 200 million with the SETAs. But we also have Tsepo 500,000. That's a huge partnership with the private sector. I think that is intended to assist in finding employment for graduates, but also finding work opportunities for those who would not have post-school training.
Okay. I suspect we're going to have a whole show on that, actually. Like, what is the Gauteng government's entire package of offerings? And the money would be part of it, but presumably each department has got something that's aimed at a youth strategy. And maybe we can do a wrap-up show later in the year when we've heard all the different budgets and try and understand it better. MEC for Finance, Barbara Creecy, many thanks for joining us. And, good luck with spending all this money.
Thank you very much.